A woman and her marriage to a bad guy can lead to even worse men. Sweetie, you should put those berries on top of the cakes before you turn them over instead of mixing them into the batter. It will make the dish better when those stubborn customers bite into it, and it cooks better that way. If anyone knew what she was talking about in that little diner, it was Carol, an always smiling, 250-pound black woman from South Alabama. How she knew about blueberry pancakes, I have no idea, but regardless, she was an expert not only in making pancakes, but in everything else she touched with a spoon and ladle. Don't worry, honey, it will all come to you in time. And if I didn't have you here with your beauty and everything, half of these rude people would have found another place. When she smiled, the whole room lit up and her laughter spread through the establishment like a sweet melody. I remembered the moment when I first met her, but the ringing signal that my order was ready brought me back to the reality of my lunch break. Jesus, girl, how did a beauty like you end up in this dusty old wilderness? He was just joking when he said it, but I could hear the lust in his tone. The tooth fairy threw me here after I knocked out my husband's front teeth. I placed a plate of pancakes and sausages in front of him, and he smiled at me. Of course, his eyes immediately went to the 2 undone buttons on my uniform and the hint of cleavage they revealed. Gunny Beauregard looked at all the women in Rose's diner, trying to find a reason for a fleeting glance at the body. He was a retired Marine who had been to 100 ports, and, like 100 other places, it was just another call. When I returned to the counter, Carol had already prepared 2 more orders, and the influx continued until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, when most customers returned to their workplaces. My shift ended at 4 in the evening, and I spent the rest of the day cleaning and helping Carol prepare for the evening influx of clients. After finishing my shift, I walked the short distance to a small trailer located next to the river, stopping only for a moment to listen to the mockingbirds sing a new tune just for me. The trailer was air-conditioned and large enough for my needs, and the small garden at the back allowed me to live quite comfortably under the circumstances. After a shower and a glass of wine, I took my usual place by the river, watching the water flow and listening to the birds singing overhead. From time to time, the whistle of a factory located downstream interrupted their harmony, but the singing of pairs of birds quickly returned to their places. I must have dozed off because I didn't hear someone come up behind me and sit down next to me. When my heavy eyelids lifted, I saw her, and for a moment I thought that I was still asleep and dreaming. Then came that moment of clarity that sweeps away the cobwebs from every dusty corner of my mind, causing every nerve to go on high alert and lifting me to my feet. I stood looking at her with tears in both of our eyes. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Dad sang in a bass voice. Mom sang tenor. My little brother and I joined, because singing seems to help the tormented soul. One day, and it will be soon, I'll join them in song again. I'm going to join the family circle at the throne. Oh no, the circle won't break. In time, Lord, in time. It was actually 2-part singing, because neither my brother nor I could hold a note even like a raven. But when we were young, Dad and Mom were like Johnny and June to us, and there were many evenings when they played the rhythm. Dad drives an old Gibson B25 and Mom drives a Sears and Roebuck Autogarp. He bought her when they were young, before kids. My brother Donnie came before me, and when I came into the world, I was named after Grandma Macy, and I took my rightful place on the side, in the back, or on the couch if we had guests. Such is the lot of the youngest child. You learn to wait for your elders, in this case your brother, who is 2 years older. In the end, everything worked out fine. We were a functional family in a dysfunctional universe, making a living among similar people in different circumstances. In other words, we were all just as normal people as can be in the Baton Rouge area, or rather Port Allen. Donnie ran away and joined the Army immediately after graduating from high school, and 6 months later his dad died of lung cancer. Mom always said that it was better than if he died slowly and painfully. Maybe, but I never came to terms with it. I was his baby. After his death, Mom was well off. The house was paid off, she had life insurance, and she worked as a nurse at Our Lady of the Lake Hospital across the river. With Donnie running away to become a man and Dad leaving, I lost the sense of security I'd felt my whole life. When I began to grow up and become a woman, I had two men in my family who took care of me and made sure that I did not fall into the clutches of wolves. With both of them gone or out of the house, I had to rely on my own skills, and to be honest, I was ill-prepared but didn't realize it. My mother tried to keep me afloat throughout my last school years, but she blessed me with her good looks and feminine charms. I had her ash blonde hair and brown eyes, as well as her ample breasts and fair skin. Without a dad to guide me with his common sense, I chose several paths that I'm not too proud of now. This went on for a while with a lot of random connections, and then it was as if someone from above poured a bucket of common sense into my head. I lost interest in running and wanted to go to college. LSU didn't accept me because of my grades, but Louisiana Tech gave me conditional admission, and 4 years later I came back to town with a shiny new diploma on how to spend 4 years studying absolutely nothing. In other words, with a bachelor's degree in liberal arts. I could do math well, knew the classics, and even spoke French, but I didn't have the specific vocational training that I really needed. That was the bucket of common sense. Anyway, Dad must have been watching me because I got a job at a big law firm in downtown Baton Rouge. I wasn't going to get rich, but it wasn't bad. There were many girls there in similar circumstances, single, reasonably educated, and enjoying what was on offer, so I fit in well. Partners and lawyers were almost exclusively men. When I joined the firm as a document writer and editor, there were 2 female lawyers. Every male lawyer had at least one assistant. I was not assigned to one specific lawyer, but I worked with 2 of them most often, Bill Cummer and Travis Delacroix. Both were successful corporate lawyers with clients across the river. Thursday evenings have become an almost mandatory time of relaxation for most of the firm's employees, especially the attorneys and associates. I'd join a couple of girls I worked with, and we'd party, and then somehow show up to work the next day. Most of the guys were married, as were most of the assistants, but that didn't stop them from getting up to mischief. I think everyone knew that almost every lawyer in the firm was sleeping with either his assistant or someone's wife. I know that both Dan and Travis flirted with me quite persistently, but I kept them at a distance without completely refusing them. For fun, I would go south of the city and hang out at places near LSU's North Gate. It was at Chimes on the corner of Highland that I met Jimmy Letourneau. He had a head of curly black hair, stood 6 feet tall, and wore a pair of Tony Lama boots, a black leather vest over a white silk t-shirt, and black leather jeans that looked like he had been poured on. Whether it was fate or death, I don't know, but our eyes met and the heavens opened, at least for me. Throwing caution to the wind, I found myself in his restored 1972 Triumph TR6, speeding down I-10 toward New Orleans. We rode around the quarter, ending at his house in the Garden District, and I learned what it means not just to have sex, but to make love all night long. Jimmy cooked breakfast for me and brought it to bed with glasses of champagne. Jesus, Sherry, how is it that you are not married to any man yet? You are too beautiful to bother with someone like me. His wide, snow-white smile was infectious. I'm a woman of my own world, Jimmy. I've never met a man who could tame me. I was talking nonsense, and he knew it, but the bickering was fun and playful. We showered and dressed, and he returned me to my car in Baton Rouge, but not before exchanging contact information and promising to meet again soon. It happened sooner than I expected, and a couple of days after we met, I found my handsome man leaning against my car after work. I thought you might like to share a drink with me here in beautiful downtown Baton Rouge, Miss Macy Benoit. Jimmy stood there with an irresistible smile on his tan face. I would have called you, but I thought you'd like the spontaneity. Besides, I just arrived on a whim. I was running an errand for my uncle, and being so close, there was only one girl I wanted to see, you know. Now he was lying, but there was no need for it. He won me over as soon as he smiled. Well, Jimmy let her know I'd be happy to share a table with you. With that, we headed to the nearby Huey's bar, where I limited myself to 2 glasses of Pinot Grigio and left room for a light dinner, which I made Jimmy pay for. Then I took him home. My lover stayed the night, and when I got up to get ready for work, I left him asleep with his head on my pillow. When I returned in the evening, this amazing man changed the bed linen, washed the clothes, made the bed, and cleaned my apartment. There was a handwritten letter on my pillow. My Sherry, I cannot express in words how wonderful our time together was, and I hope that we can find ourselves in the same wonderful circumstances again. With that in mind, I hope that you will accept my invitation to dinner and an evening in Newtown, Orleans this Saturday. If you want, I'll pick you up on Saturday morning and drive you to Crescent City for lunch at your favorite place. Until then, lovely Macy Benoit. Jimmy Letourneau. Pleasant surprise is not the right word to express the joy I felt after reading this letter. Jimmy and I clicked together, or whatever you want to call it, when two people seem to melt into each other. I've been with a lot of men when I was younger, and even now I regularly date and enjoy the company of a masculine man, but I've never felt the same way as I do now. Later that evening, I called him to accept his invitation and thank him for the nice job he did cleaning my apartment. He picked me up on Saturday morning, and I had the best weekend of my adult life. Mom, his name is Jimmy Letourneau, and his family is from New Orleans, and I know he works in the import business for his family. I want you to meet him, okay? Yes, the rich Letourneaus from New Orleans. I will meet him, but you have to be careful, Macy. They have connections, and not all of these connections are good and decent people. They got into the newspapers a couple of years ago because of some business on the West Bank from here. Mom was always like that, where she didn't trust people, always assumed the worst about them. However, I brought Jimmy to meet my mom, and they seemed to get along well. It helped that he knew almost every Cajun recipe she had and more. By the time we left, they were already planning a barbecue for the following weekend. From then on, Jimmy and I became an inseparable couple, and the only problem was my place of work in Baton Rouge and his work and home in New Orleans. The drive between us was an hour and a quarter on I-10. We managed it anyway, as most evenings I just rested before the next day of work. When I went to meet his family, I was struck by their house. It was an old building in the Garden District on St. Charles Street, not far from Jimmy's house, but it smelled and looked like a rich people's house, and the characters I met, from uncles to aunts to cousins, were Italians from Louisiana. Jimmy's mother was Italian from the Marcello family, which explained the strong presence of this heritage and decor in the house. His father was a huge bear Cajun, and we got along great, while his mother sometimes looked at me suspiciously, but by the time we left in the evening, we were already hugging and kissing. Apparently, I passed the test, because the next day Jimmy proposed to me, and I agreed to become his wife. Jimmy and I got married at St. Louis Cathedral in Jackson Square at his mother's insistence. I was walked down the aisle by my brother Donnie, and James S.R. charmed my mom before she was carried away by Jimmy's uncle Tommy. She's a grown woman, and I didn't need to keep an eye on her, especially on my wedding day. When we left, she was still under Tommy's care with a big smile on her face. Life was good for a while until I got bored. Jimmy spent a lot of time at work, often on business trips. He didn't talk much about what he was doing, and I never insisted. His mother always said it was a man's job, and I respected her for that, but I'm from a different generation. I needed something to do while Jimmy did his thing. An opportunity arose when my old firm announced the opening of 2 new offices, one in New Orleans and the other in Lafayette. I called my old boss, and she got me a job in the New Orleans office as an administrator with my own office. When I showed up to work on my first day, it turned out that I worked for Travis Delacroix. He and Bill Comer both transferred to New Orleans as natives and Chilean graduates. I thought that I was a grown woman and could handle the sexual innuendos that I knew would come. I managed, but sometimes it got a little hot. To be honest, I even liked this flirting. They were both stunning specimens of masculinity, especially Travis with his huge arms and height of almost 6.5 feet. Both were married, although Travis' marriage was on the verge of divorce, and Bill had 2 children, but this did not stop them. I knew how everything was in the old office, so nothing was surprising. Jimmy and I had been married almost 3 years when the problem started, and when I tried to figure out what was wrong, he quickly sat me down. He never brought home any of his colleagues and still hasn't complained about my career. Macy, why do you even need this job? I make enough to take care of everything you need. Why don't you quit and move here with your mom or spend more time at my parents' place? This usually led to an argument that was never resolved, and we would both be angry for a couple of days until Jimmy would drag me into bed and make love like in the early days. Everything was fine for a few weeks, and then he would start again. Eventually, he stopped picking fights, but still nothing was the same. Another year passed, and Jimmy began to be absent more and more, and everything in our lives decreased, including the frequency of lovemaking. I began to think that he had a woman on his side, perhaps even several, but I could not catch him on this. That all changed one lunchtime in Maspero with Travis, Bill, and another girl from work. We had just paid and were leaving through the side exit when I happened to see Jimmy coming in from Decatur Street. He didn't notice me, so I hid under the awning and watched as he and a woman in a tight white dress headed towards an empty table. His hand was on her waist, low on her waist as he walked with me. He broke my heart that day. I didn't need to see them in bed to know he was having an affair. The question now was, what am I going to do about it? I was asleep when Jimmy came home that evening, but I woke up when he got into bed and snuggled next to me. I lay there, listening to him fall asleep, his breathing becoming even and familiar. Somehow, despite impossible circumstances, I fell asleep again and left the house before he woke up. Macy, you're not yourself today. Did something happen? Travis looked at me with his piercing blue eyes, filled with curiosity, a lawyer's curiosity. It's okay, just a lot on my mind. Look, I might have to leave early for lunch. I need to go home and take care of some things. He didn't mind. We all ran away when we had to. He'd been doing this a lot lately while he and his wife were going through a breakup. Funny thing is, she was the one who got caught cheating with one of the neighbors when his wife came home in the middle of the day. It became even more funny when I parked in front of our house at noon. As I got out of the car, I passed a late model SL, clearly feminine, with a compact mirror on the dashboard. When I entered the hallway, everything looked normal, and I quietly headed to the kitchen. Everything was fine except for the car in the driveway and the fact that I never came home in the middle of the day. It seems there was only one such case before. When I went upstairs, I heard them. The master bedroom was at the end of the hallway from the stairs, and the door was open. Standing at the door, I saw 3 people on my bed. I wanted to scream, but remained silent. The woman I saw in Maspero yesterday, my husband, and another woman with dark hair. None of them noticed me because of the position of the head of the bed and the door where I stood. I quickly took a few pictures with my phone and quietly left. I wanted to cry. I really wanted to. I wanted to cry a river of tears over the loss of what was dear to me. Instead, I went into the office, grabbed a stack of documents and a key, and then walked out the front door. On the way back to work, I was melancholy, depressed at best, until I got to the garage. Then I became angry and pulled myself together before returning to the office. Jesus, Macy, you look like Genghis Khan should stay away from this floor. Travis said, "Let's go to your office before I lose my temper," was my curt response. With a mixture of tears and anger, with a tinge of disappointment, I told him what I had discovered. I was able to get through it all, not burst into tears, but it was difficult. I knew it would come later. I had a job now, and I knew I had a friend who would listen. For the rest of the day, my thoughts raced between revenge, remorse, and resignation as I struggled with what to do. I knew Jimmy was a bad guy, but I thought we really had something great, even with the difficulties. Later in the evening, I went with the lawyers and drank too much, and if not for Travis, one of the other lawyers would have won me a prize. Instead, he took me home and put me in his spare bedroom. The next morning, we quickly had breakfast and were about to leave when I saw 2 large silhouettes approaching us. Suddenly, a black cloth was covered over me, and someone lifted me onto their shoulder. I heard the sounds of a struggle and assumed it was Travis. My heart sank with fear, and I felt like I was starting to feel sick. I couldn't hold back my tears. One of the men said something rude, and another voice interrupted him, warning him of the consequences. The sounds of fighting continued until it became quiet. I was so scared that I couldn't cry or speak, but when the emotions overwhelmed me, I started screaming until someone spoke. "Shut up, or we'll kill him," someone said. I nodded quickly, after which the intruders left the apartment. I took off my hood and saw Travis on the floor. I called 911 and cried the whole time, trying to console him until the ambulance arrived, followed by the police. By the time they got the story out of me, they considered it a random home invasion, and then I knew they wouldn't be any help. I couldn't understand it, but I didn't like the way they looked at me, and anyone who was born around this town knows that the local police have been searching for them for decades. When the police let me go, I rushed to the hospital to check on Travis and sat in the waiting room with Travis' mom for 6 hours while the doctors did their job. When he was transferred to intensive care, he was under guard, but he was fine, but I could only watch him through the side window. After giving his mom my contact information at Mama's, I made my move. The first stop was my bank, where I withdrew $35,000, trying to keep an eye on whether I was being followed. If I did, it would be too late anyway. Next stop was at another bank, where the key around my neck gave me access to the safe. When I opened it, I was in for a shock. It was a large box containing $100,000 in cash and possibly a pound of diamonds and other precious stones. I had no idea of its value, but I knew it was enormous. It was worth more than Jimmy's life or my own if anyone wanted them. Jimmy couldn't belong to them. I thought it was just for storing money. I loaded everything into a couple of bank bags and left as quickly as I could. 15 minutes later, I was heading down I-10 and didn't stop until I reached Lake Charles, where I found a car dealer willing to take my 2014 Acura RDX in exchange for a 2012 Dodge Ram. Later, I had no idea how stupid it all was, but at the time I didn't even think about how easy it would be to keep track of vehicle changes. Before dark, after stopping at Walmart to refill my now non-existent wardrobe and toiletries, the truck turned west on I-10 again and stayed on the highway until I could see the sunrise behind me and San Antonio ahead. I found a small, nondescript motel on the east side of town, collapsed on the bed, fell asleep, and stayed there until 7 that evening. Mom, listen to me carefully. I had to go and people might be looking for me, but I didn't care. I can't live with Jimmy anymore. He's dangerous. Macy, baby, the state police came here earlier, wanted to talk to you. 2 men in suits. They said it was important. For Mom, everything was black and white, law and order, right and wrong. There were no curtains between them, and she thought I was running away from the law. Mom, I'm serious. Listen to me. I'm not running from the law. These people, they will look for me because of what someone else did. My friend from work, Travis, got beat up really bad, Mom, and I know Jimmy was behind it. I know this exactly as I breathe. There was no reason for this, but he almost got killed, Mom. Look, I have to go away for a while, but I'm going to talk Donnie into staying with you, okay? Mom was crying at this point, so I told her I loved her and ended the conversation. Then I called my brother Donnie and convinced him to stay with her for a while, and then I threw the phone into a nearby creek. I wiped the condensation off the mirror with a towel and stood in front of it. I just looked like a scared little girl. It's funny where our minds take us sometimes. At that moment, I remembered standing in our backyard when I was 10 or so and falling out of the little treehouse my dad had built for us. Apart from a couple of skinned elbows and an ear full of dirt, I was fine, but I stood there crying until he picked me up and held me close. It was at this memory that the tears really began to flow as I stood in the small hotel bathroom. It wasn't just the fact that Jimmy was cheating in my bed, and it wasn't just the idea that I was miles and hours away from home in a seedy motel. There was also Travis, still in the hospital room, and his poor mother, distraught over things she knew nothing about. That's when the enormity of it all brought me to the bathroom floor, and I cried and cried until I had nothing left. I left San Antonio in the morning and spent the next 2 weeks driving all over Texas until I found myself sitting on the beach in Port Aransas, watching the waves roll ashore, driven by a storm. The water was warm, and the little kids were doing what kids do, while their parents were relaxing in sun loungers, watching the sea, just like me. Sitting on the bed in the small house that I rented for a week, I laid it all out on the unfolded table. There was $134 to $236.82 in cash and 4 piles of precious stones, diamonds, rubies, sapphires, and emeralds. There were the most diamonds, about 2-3 of the total, and they were beautiful and mesmerizing. While running around the state, I bought a pay phone with a data plan from a store near Austin. This allowed me to keep up to date with the news, and I could check my email, and with the help of proxy servers on the internet, I could also send emails without having them come back to me. It also allowed me to use the internet. I have found that a pound of 1-carat diamonds costs anywhere from $11 million to $30 million or more, depending on the quality. These were precious stones, not technical diamonds. I know the other stones were worth a lot less, but that didn't matter at the moment. I packed everything back into my bags, drove to the nearest bank I could find, and paid for the use of the safe for the next 2 years, naming my mother as a contact if anything happened to me. I put $100,000 and precious stones in the box. It's not a pleasant place to be along the Neches River near Beaumont, Texas in mid-July. The temperature rose to 100 degrees, and the humidity was so stifling that all I could wear was a pair of short pants, a halter top, and sandals, and even then I was dripping with sweat as I tended the checkout counter at a roadside greengrocer. About 70 miles above Mobile, there is a place where a line is drawn in the summer. If you're driving on I-65 from Montgomery, you'll feel it if you have your window down or are riding your bike. This powerful gust of bay wind hits you right in the face, and it gets stronger as you get closer to the shore. Head west, and when you exit onto Beaumont from I-10, you'll find the epicenter of Vietnam smack dab in the middle of southeast Texas. The old lady hired me right away when I stopped one day to buy a few peaches before trying to leave again. I was living on the $34,000 I had left over since I'd left Port Aransas over a year ago, minus the $8,000 I'd spent on a used trailer that I was now hauling on a truck. She knew me as Anne, my middle name, and I think she realized that I was running away from something or someone. One evening, over a couple of Lone Star beers, she told me her story. I was a little girl named Sally when my father got me to work for a man he worked with to do housework. I think this man helped my father find a job, so my father always spoke highly of him. His name was Charles Mobley, is a huge man, and he noticed me when I was a teenager. When I was 16, my father fell ill and had to be hospitalized at the state charity hospital. My mother had long since run away, so she could not help. Well, Charles took me in, and it soon became clear what was expected of me. At first, everything was fine, and then he started drinking at home. He had never done this before. He usually drank in a bar. Something changed in him, maybe. It wasn't long before he started stalking me. Damn, call it a spade. I had no other choice, and when he wasn't drinking, everything was fine. I still had sex with him, but everything was fine, you know. This went on for a couple of years until he decided we needed to get married, so he dragged me to court, and we got married right away. Everything was fine for a while. When my father died, everything went wrong. I think Charles thought he would inherit his father's house, or, more importantly, his 20 acres of land along the river. This did not happen. The probate court ate it all for old debts. Then he started hitting me. Then I decided I'd had enough. The next night, I collected as much as I could carry and took $35 from his cigar box. I don't know what came over me, but before I left, I set his damn house on fire and walked down the road without looking back. As far as I know, Anne, I'm still married to the old bastard, if he's still alive. She chuckled and added, I've had 2 husbands since then and buried Sammy a couple of years ago. The old lady was more than 40 years older than me, but that night we were sisters. I told her my story and what I was striving for in my mind, leaving out a few important details. She simply nodded, saying that I did the right thing if it made me feel good. After a couple of beers, the mosquitoes started biting me, getting under my top, and I decided to call it a day and return to my trailer. And get me some of those green cabbage leaves. Chance was a driller working upriver, and he'd come by almost every day since I'd started working that spot. Sally just smiled when he was around and later said that he just comes to look at my ass and breasts when I fulfill his order. It didn't matter to me as long as he was buying groceries. He was actually a nice guy if you didn't mind the numerous tattoos that covered his body. I didn't mind the tattoos, I just didn't consider them anything special, especially when millions of other people have almost the same patterns and standard designs from tattoo parlors. However, I liked this man. It's been over a year since I ran away from Louisiana, and in that time I haven't been with a man since I was with Jimmy in New Orleans. Anyway, I often dreamed about Chance and compared him to Jimmy. My husband was an ideal lover, intelligently gifted and attentive. God, he was attentive. But he was also an unfaithful deceiver, and there was another aspect. I almost put it out of my mind. I didn't know what I was running from, but I knew that after what they did to Travis, I needed to look back. It's funny, but there was no one to see. No Louisiana State Police, no big brutes ready to rip my throat out, no Jimmy, no one. I called my mom a couple of times over the past year, but I never told her where I was. I didn't want her to know. Donnie visited her often. She never heard from the police again after that first day, as far as I knew. Even with Jimmy away, a year later, he still held me captive. Chance has tried to romance me several times, and I always smile and avoid it. I was still wearing my wedding ring, but apparently he didn't care, and I finally gave in. I think the dress was too short, even though it was a couple of inches longer than the shorts I wore every day on point. I wore minimal makeup as we first went to a barbecue place, and then to a country bar where he and his friends went sometimes. The BBQ was okay, but the fun started in the ballroom. I let my hair down and had a good time, although I knew that a few times I should have worn something more modest. The color of my pink panties became known to several people, but I didn't care. I was having fun. I had a bad boyfriend who took care of me that evening. A couple of his friends suggested continuing the party at one of their places. They picked up another girl, and with 5 guys and only 2 girls, they thought it would be fun. I wasn't sure. Chance, I want to go to your place, just the 2 of us, okay? I whispered in his ear. We left the party, and an hour later I found myself in his bed. For a big brute, he kept the house in order. There were pictures of his family on the walls, and the overall place was neat. After breakfast, he drove me home, and I freshened up before going to help Sally at the kiosk. When I got there, the kiosk was not open yet, so I went to her house and saw several cars that I had not seen before. Knocking on the door, a small, thin woman of about 45 answered the door, and after I introduced myself, I learned that it was Sally's daughter and that her mother had been taken to the hospital after a stroke. She saw that I was upset and invited me inside, and after we had a cup of tea, she offered to go with her to the hospital if I wanted. So we did, and Sally was in worse shape than I expected. She was unconscious and unresponsive to stimuli. When we returned to the waiting room, there were several other people there that Sally's daughter apparently knew. One of them was a large, outgoing woman with an infectious smile. "You're Anne, aren't you?" she asked me. "Yes, madam, that's my name." That's what I thought. Sally has been talking a lot about you. Looks like she won't be able to pursue her little hobby anymore. It's a shame. She was right about the kiosk. It was fun to work there, and I enjoyed the company, but there wasn't enough income to support it. Sally always said she was just doing it to supplement her Social Security pension, but I was sure she was just paying me. "Can you cook and waitress?" she asked me. I didn't know how, but I said I could. Then she directly offered me a job. "My name is Carol, and I run Rose's Diner a little up the road along the river. If you want, I need help. You won't get rich, but Sally says you live in a trailer by the river. I have some old trailer hookups behind the diner on the river. If you agree, just pay for the electricity." So I went from pea picker to Flo the waitress in an instant, and later that day I moved my trailer to a spot behind Rose's Diner and called an electrician to hook up the electricity in my name. That evening Sally died of a stroke, and a couple of days later a whole crowd of people came to her funeral. "And you're doing this wrong," Carol laughed. "I knew you were exaggerating when you said you knew all this. Let me show you." This went on for a while until I finally got the hang of it. Rose's Diner was a popular spot for people from the plant downriver, like Chance. He stayed there for 3 more weeks after our first time, and we met 6 more times. Then he left for another job, this time in Dakota, building trekking sites. He even invited me to go with him. But this was impossible. Instead, I gave him goodbye sex. Rose's Diner was an eclectic place for all sorts of people throughout Natchez. Lunch crowd from several factories downstream, a few military retirees, and a group of middle-aged women who came here every Wednesday for lunch. I recognized many of them by their names and their life stories. I never shared my story other than to hint at leaving my bad husband and starting a new life. They liked it, and I became one of them. Of course, I had to deal with lustful men, some of them worse than others. One of the worst was an early retiree from one of the factories named Mason Fremont. All the waitresses tolerated his antics and considered him a deceiver who overestimated his capabilities. One of the girls nicknamed him Scabies because he was always scratching his head. "Come here, sweet girl. What's delicious on the menu today besides you, darling?" Scabies always tried to start a conversation, thinking he would get lucky. He had a better chance of winning the lottery than he ever had of sleeping with one of us. The problem wasn't that he was ugly. The problem was his disgusting personality with the same banal tackles every day. We were all babes and sweeties, even nice asses. One day, during a very busy lunch hour, I found myself in the kitchen washing dishes because the guy who usually did it called in sick. By the end of the lunch rush, I looked like a wet chicken in my waitress uniform. "Carol, I need to run to the trailer and change into something dry. I'll be back in a minute." She nodded, busy in the kitchen. I walked out the side door and headed towards the trailer. After I poured myself a large glass of iced tea, I took off my clothes and headed to the shower. It was a small place, only 22 feet long, with a queen bed and a walk-in shower. I had just stopped at the edge of the bed when suddenly someone attacked me. At some point, Gunny burst into the room Beauregard and saved me, and Carol ran into the trailer. Mason Fremont was lying on the floor, and Gunny was standing over him. I quickly covered myself with the sheet, and Carol ran up to me, hugging me. "I saw him heading towards the trailer right after you, and I knew he was up to something bad," said Gunny. I said Carol and ran. Gunny was a 20-year Marine veteran who had seen many dangers in Operation Desert Storm and Afghanistan. He had been a regular at Rose's Diner since he retired and flirted with all of us. He was one of the nice womanizers, and I think a couple of the girls gave in to him sometimes. He paid well and was a fun conversationalist. Now he has become my personal hero. Scabies was dead. We've all seen it. But Gunny was not at a loss. He slung it over his shoulder, carried it out the door, and laid it on the ground behind him. "Nobody's going to miss that slimy bastard, and we don't need the police, so I'll take care of it." Everyone has their own past, and I think Gunny had his. I knew I didn't want to see the police. Carol stayed with me while I showered and got dressed, and after an hour or so I told her I wanted to go back to work. "No damn way, girl, you're crazy." I interrupted her at this point. "Carol, everything must go as usual. I'm going back to work." "Carol, take the girl back to the diner. I have business here," Gunny said with authority, and so we did. I don't know what Gunny did while we were gone, but everything seemed fine later in the evening, and still no one had ever asked about Mason Fremont. A pair of mockingbirds built a nest in the myrtle tree next to my river garden, and every evening it turned into an outdoor concert with a maestro's duo competing with the songbirds further down the bank. Life at Rose's Diner became its own orchestration of events. Carol took me under her wing, and Gunny became my favorite client for obvious reasons. It was a feeling of being almost like my father that kept him from getting what he wanted, much to his chagrin, but he understood. It had been almost 2 years since I ran away, and no one seemed to be looking for me. Lately, I've been thinking about going back to Port Allen to see my mom. I think the only thing holding me back was the fear of running into Jimmy. A glass of wine in hand felt delicious after a busy day, and a second glass ensconced me in my sun lounger while the river flowed in front of me. My cabbage leaves were almost done, and my bean pods were just dry enough to peel. The calmness led me to slumber. I don't know what it was, but something woke me up, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I was still in a sweet dream by the river before I jumped to my feet in tears. "Mom, what are you doing here?" We looked at each other. I stood in front of her, and she sat in a chair next to my chaise lounge. I fell to my knees and hugged her, crying in her arms. "Why? How did you know? I mean, when did you arrive?" 1,000 questions were spinning in my head. "Don't worry about it now, you hear? I needed to find you because this whole thing went on too long, and you don't know everything that happened, honey." I pulled her to her feet, and we walked hand in hand to my trailer, where I made her sweet tea with lemon just like she always liked. Mom looked different, better or more well-groomed. I couldn't understand it. We sat there for a long time, looking at each other. "I know everything that happened, honey. There's no reason to run away anymore." "So how did you find me, Mom?" "You have good friends now, and they are looking out for you. I met your friend Carol before coming here this afternoon. She's a wonderful woman, Mrs. Nelson from Port Allen reminds me. Now don't be mad, but Mrs. H. Carol called me a while ago after the guy we hired figured out where you were. It didn't take long, trust me. If you were trying to hide, God, you were terrible at that's it, child. It's good that no one was looking for you, isn't it?" She smiled at me widely, and I couldn't hold back my tears. Over the past almost 2 years, I've talked to her maybe 4 or 5 times using burner phones. Now we need to get you home for a while and figure out what to do next. There's a lot you don't know, believe me. After a quick goodbye and thank you to Carol, and leaving her with my truck and trailer, my mom and I headed back to Baton Rouge in the morning. I-10 can be a boring road on a normal day, but this gave us a chance to talk about what happened. "He's in the Dixon Correctional Facility, your Jimmy. He was arrested for running an illegal jewelry and diamond and securities business. That's what the cops said. They raided your house a couple days after you left New Orleans and arrested him. About 6 months later, before he went to trial, they busted a gang for robbery and racketeering. They must have had good evidence because a couple of them started singing like mockingbirds and accused Jimmy of attacking your friend from work. What was his name? Travis. Jimmy got 20 years. Here's where things get interesting. Someone robbed a cargo of gems over 3 years ago in a secure airline warehouse, and the feds and state police believe Jimmy was involved in selling the stones, but couldn't prove it. According to the newspapers, no one knows where they are now, and this is a huge fortune. Huge." I looked at my mother and nodded, trying to make sense of it all. As far as I knew, I was still married to Jimmy, and I needed to deal with it. It would be easy for him to get a divorce while in prison, but even so, I loved the damn bastard. If I could, I would kill him to make things easier. "Honey, when we get back, don't be surprised. I have a friend who I've been seeing almost as long as you've been gone. It's Uncle Jimmy. Tommy let her know." She looked at me, waiting for a reaction, and when I showed nothing more than a raised eyebrow, she continued, "He helped me around the house, and he's a really good man. He's really good. The whole family is very disappointed with Jimmy, including his father. He almost disowned him." I had to think about it. I loved Jimmy's father, even if I was a little cold towards his mother, but I think that's the case with a lot of mothers-in-law. We arrived at my mom's house around noon, and after I unpacked and settled in, all I wanted to do was get some sleep in the room where I grew up. Waking up around 6 in the evening, I cleaned myself up and went to the old treehouse that held so many memories. By the time I got back to the house, I was hungry and knew what I was going to do. 3 months later, it was a clear and cool day as I drove along Route 19 through Zachary and Slaughter toward Jackson and the Dixon Correctional Facility. I was in a restored 1972 Triumph TR6, green with a racing stripe and a small Union Jack on the back. It once belonged to my husband. Now I took it for myself. There were no problems getting through security. I probably should have dressed more modestly, but I decided that highlighting my breasts and butt and wearing bright red lipstick would be the best solution. The guard was considering not letting me in until he saw my lightly perfumed breasts peeking out of my dark blue dress. Movies usually show visitors sitting behind bars or behind glass to talk to prisoners, but in this facility I was led into a comfortable room where I found Jimmy sitting at a round table, his feet still shackled to the floor. When he looked at me, I knew that he saw my breasts, his wife's breasts, her firm ass and long legs, as well as her lips. "Hi, Jimmy," I said with a slight smile on my lips. I came with a purpose. "Hey, Macy, you look really good." We looked at each other in silence for some time. "Why?" I exclaimed when I sat down opposite him. "Because, my chérie, you cheated on me with that Creole lawyer." I think he saw the rage in my eyes, and I tried to control my voice. "I've never touched another man in all the time we've been together, not once, you son of a bitch. Travis Delacroix saved me and kept the horny scumbags away from me. He put me up for the night and was an absolute gentleman, and you almost killed him, you pathetic piece of shit." The look on my husband's face was priceless. He was so sure that I slept with Travis that he almost killed him, and now his wandering eyes betrayed his loss of confidence and bravado, even as he sat. "I had dinner with your father last night, Jimmy. I'm saying this so you know he agreed with everything I did. He signed the house over to me because it was always in his name." I took the documents out of the envelope I brought with me and handed them to him. "I divorced you, and I didn't need your signature to do it. Do you want to know when I decided to do it, Jimmy? It was on my lunch break the day before I left New Orleans, afraid of your cruelty. You were with 3 women of easy virtue, in my damn bed." This bastard even had a tear in his eye. "Macy, it didn't mean anything." "Shut up. I don't want to hear it. You took her to lunch at Maspero the day before. I saw you. It's over." I looked at him for some more time. I had 2 more things to do. "You remember Travis, right? I had dinner with him last night. He was completely recovered, enough to have sex with me." "Shut up." Jimmy's eyes filled with rage. "You are where you should be. You are nothing to me anymore but a dirty ex-husband." He sat defeated, saying nothing, and I bent over so he could see my cleavage. I did what I had been rehearsing for a long time. I knew how it would work. His eyes were on my chest, and when I pressed my elbows to my sides, it emphasized my cleavage. I adjusted it, and when I did, a small shiny stone fell quietly onto the table. His eyes followed the stone, which stopped in the center of the table between us. It was 1-carat diamond. Every possible emotion was passed between us. "It's a souvenir, Jimmy. It's all that's left of everything you've ever had, including me." I left the room, leaving the diamond glistening on the table and my ex-husband sitting in his shackles for another 19 years to consider his fate. The waters in Port Aransas were still warm, and many children were playing, building sand castles and frolicking in the spray of the surf. My toes sank into the wet sand as I stood looking out over the bay and clear sky. This is an interesting spot on top of Mustang Island, opposite the bay that protects Corpus Christi. Everything I need is here, if only I knew what I needed, which I didn't. Mom found Tommy Letourneau, and Travis met a girl in Maspero. I lied to Jimmy about Travis. It was a great fantasy, but Travis is obsessed with his new woman, and I would never sleep with a married man, at least not knowingly. So I finished my business, wandered around the beach some more, and sold the Triumph to Jimmy to a young guy who was looking for a new adventure. When I left town, it was in a new Ram with satellite radio on. "Well, damn it, look at you, girl," Gunny beamed Beauregard when he looked at me from his plate of pancakes and sausages when I sat down at his table. Carol ran out from behind the counter and nearly knocked me over before I could get up and hug her. The three of us sat down at a table, and Carol shouted to the new cook in the kitchen, "French fries club for my girl." We told each other the latest news, and a few old customers came over when they came for their usual lunch. I gave my trailer to Gunny when he said he knew a couple whose house burned down a week ago. I didn't need him anymore. I gave my old truck to Carol. Carol had to go back to work, and I was able to thank Gunny properly for what he did for me when I lived in the back. I always thought of him as an old retired Marine, but Hannah was actually only 43 years old. He was tough as nails, with Corps tattoos on his arms, and he retired from the Corps after 20 years of service in 2 wars, with a Silver Star and 2 Purple Hearts, just 5 years ago. He was also a gentle lover. "Jesus, honey, you are beautiful," he whispered to me. "So where are you going now?" "I don't know, Gunny. I'll probably drive around the country, see what I haven't seen. I'll go to California, maybe even Alaska. I don't know." We lay there for a while longer before we got up and took turns showering, as the shower room was too small for both of us. He had to leave, but not before I hugged him and put a small bag of jewelry in his pocket. Daniel P. "Hannah Beauregard, I don't want you to open this until I leave, okay? I'm serious, don't open it until I leave." He agreed, and we returned to the diner. He got into his truck, waved to me, and drove off. Carol and I were left standing in front of the diner, not wanting to say goodbye. I knew I would return someday, I just didn't know when. As we hugged, I did the same. I put the second small bag of jewelry in her pocket. "Wait until I leave, Mrs. Horace Carroll, and then you will open it. You mean the world to me, and that's as much to me as it is to you. Thank you for everything you've done, and I promise I'll be back someday. You have Mom's address to contact me, plus my mobile." Both bags contained about 100 carats of precious stones, mostly diamonds. I kissed her one more time, got into my truck, and, with a tearful wave in my eyes, headed onto I-10 to continue my solo journey. I was a divorced woman with a weakness for bad boys. I just had to learn to differentiate between them and bad men. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.